Quick question. Are you a fan of Tifa? Well, it's time to get hyped. Final Fantasy VII fans, get hyped. Tifa fans, definitely get hyped. We have some major news for Remake Part 3. We just covered the interview with the game's director, Naoki Hamaguchi-san, and if they plan to move over to UE5 or stay on the UE4 engine, you can check that out down below in the comments. But today there was a huge panel interview with translators and everything talking about details about the development of Rebirth, plans as updates for Part 3, and even questions from the crowd that was there. We have a lot to go over. So if you enjoy everything Final Fantasy VII or anything Final Fantasy related, then consider hitting that like button and leaving a comment down below. We are super close to hitting our year-end goal of 5K subs, and only 4% of you are subscribed, so let's see if we can get that number up a bit. And of course, if you have any constructive criticism or things we should improve in our videos, please let us know down below in the comments. Okay, let's get started. Now, for those of you who actually want to watch the live stream itself, it's actually a little hard to find because Square, for some reason, unlisted it at the time of this recording. However, Hamaguchi-san himself posted the live stream on his Twitter, so go ahead and check the link down below in the comments to watch the whole thing. It's actually really fascinating. The first part of the live stream goes over the process of making Rebirth, going from Remake to Rebirth itself, and a lot of other stuff that we've heard in other interviews leading up to the game's release over the last couple of years. I myself really enjoyed these kind of deep dive looks into development of gaming, and I even talked to some developers sometimes when I go over to Tokyo Game Show every single year. Then around the hour mark, give or take, we get a bunch of talk about Part 3. It's funny because Hamaguchi-san actually says he can't give us a ton of information, but oh boy, does he actually break that rule and just says, you know what, I could get in trouble for this, but I gotta talk about it a little bit. And we have a lot to discuss here for this time. By the way, if you also want to be discussing this live with us sometimes, make sure to catch us during our live streams when we talk about everything gaming related. If you have anything you want to talk about when it comes to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Part 3, or anything like that, make sure to join us there and leave a comment as we answer you live and we talk about it. Who knows, you might even show up on our social media and other clips as well in videos. We stream on both YouTube and Twitch, so make sure you check us out. Now, getting back to the actual Part 3 information, at around an hour and 13 minutes, 1 hour, 12 minutes, and 25 seconds to be exact, an interesting question is asked. Quote, how do you approach managing fan expectations while developing Part 3, knowing you are working on such beloved scenes from the original? And like I said above, Hamaguchi-san says he can't give us too many details, but then he actually gives us a lot to work with, actually. One of the first things he actually asks the audience is when thinking about the third act of the game, which is what Part 3 is in terms of the remake trilogy, he asked the audience that was there in the live stream, what do they think about? And after a few seconds, he brings up two things. One of those being the Highwind. Now, if you don't know what the Highwind is, we got a brief glimpse of it in Rebirth, but we never actually got to fly around in it. In the original, we do get to. During this part of the live stream, he mentions that traveling in the Highwind is one of the big things that they're working on. In fact, this was actually mentioned all the way back in the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth Ultimania, which we covered in a video a few months ago. You can check that out as well in the top right corner for more extra details. But he says they have the Highwind is one of the big core gameplay elements for this game, which would make sense again if you played the original. In that game, you could actually travel the entire world of Final Fantasy VII, set down almost anywhere, and just simply walk around that section of the world that you landed in. Back in the interview found in the Ultimania, where they didn't have an answer on how to work on this yet, they talked about how it's not as easy as it was back then with all the world details and everything. I mean, it would look pretty silly to have the Highland land on top of a house and say Gongaga, because I get where they're coming from. They want you to be able to fly anywhere you want, but you can't just simply say, oh yeah, we'll just land wherever we want, and next thing you know, you're landing in the Highwind on top of the Golden Saucer. It's just not going to work that way. So at that particular time in that interview, which we have to assume was most likely either in late 2023 or early 2024, they were trying to figure out how to work around that, but allow the player to travel anywhere. Well, it looks like they are very confident they have found a way to do that and can't wait for players to try it out. Quote, the prototyping and experimenting on the Highwind has reached quite the level now. So while it's obviously not perfect, the game itself won't release until 2027, give or take, this gives them a lot of time to iron things out and improve upon those things and make some amazing strides in Part 3. The final piece that they talk about when it comes to the Highwind is that there will be a new gameplay element that allows players to do something special from said Highwind as you sail the skies within it. Obviously kind of cryptic, but it's still very fun to kind of theorize about what that could potentially mean. I remember hearing a couple of big YouTubers, I think it was Maximilian dude, saying maybe this is where we're going to have the chocobo breeding. Not really sure, but that would be kind of cool. Another thing they briefly mentioned during the stream was that Vincent and Cid would be playable in Part 3. Now, this is pretty obvious if you've played the original. Heck, Red 13 in the 2020 remake was in the game, but we couldn't actually control him in our party. Rebirth then came along and added him, Yuffie, and Cait Sith. Then obviously Rebirth introduced us to both Vincent and Cid, so it would make sense that Game 3 would complete the party from the original. Going off of that obvious information there, they then brought up synergy attacks. In my personal opinion, synergy attacks is one of the coolest additions to the gameplay that they were actually introduced in Rebirth. Stated here, synergy attacks will be in Part 3 along with a completely new game system and Tifa's interaction with them. In fact, it was after this that they really started to talk about Tifa a lot at this point. They say the third game is going to feature Tifa a lot more. Again, if you've played the original, this should not be surprising at all. After what happens to Cloud at the Northern Crater, Tifa actually becomes the leader of the group for some time. And that is not even mentioning the big livestream sequence that we know is going to be not only huge to the story, but helping Cloud become the person that he is supposed to be. Also, total side note, but a really funny question that was asked from the people there in the live stream. Someone asked if Tifa will suplex somebody, and Hamaguchi-san said they are looking into it. If you have to be confused by this, it's because in the original game of Final Fantasy VII, one of Tifa's limit breaks is literally a suplex. And since we're going to be fighting some pretty crazy enemies besides Sephiroth, it's a fair question. So they got to make sure they get that right if they do add that in. Some smaller things talked about during the live stream include things like their mini games. As you know, Rebirth had a ton of mini games, which were all brought over from the original game. So things like Queen Blood will be returning, but also in Part 3, we will most likely be seeing things like snowboarding, which was a very popular mini game back in the original. I will say this, however, though, if you did not like the mini games in Rebirth, well, time to suck it up, because again, every mini game that we saw in Rebirth was in the original. I will say though, I'm not giving them a free pass on the mini games. They need to iron out some of the controls personally. There were a few in the mini games where the controls were just not the greatest. I personally love things like the chocobo racing and everything, but some of the other mini games definitely could have used some updates. And please do not make us play as only Cait Sith trying to throw boxes. If you know, you know. The last couple of points made during this live stream were actually in regards to the story itself. Semi-spoilers, I guess. If you've played the original, then it's nothing you haven't seen already. If you haven't played Rebirth, however, though, then I guess skip ahead a little bit. But regardless, if you're clicking on this video and you're talking about Part 3, then you've probably played Rebirth. Now, they had to say this again during this live stream, but they have said over time and time again, yet for some reason, a lot of people refuse to listen. But the team wanted to reassure that they are not changing any big moments for the overall story. They are simply adding extra details and creating new experiences that fit within the original game. If you happen to have read any of the Final Fantasy VII books like Tales of Two Past or 2000 Gil or even On a Way to a Smile, then it's those extra details they are talking about. Ever since the original game release, the creator of FF7 wanted to expand on certain parts since he was not able to do it in the original game due to the limitation of the technology at the time and just how long the original was. They've added things over time when it comes to Final Fantasy VII, and for the most part, it's all worked out pretty well. So they're taking those elements, those backstories and things like that, and they are putting them into this game because this is supposed to be the definitive story of Final Fantasy VII. I mean, heck, that's why it's 3 games. The entire team wanted it to be 3 parts because of how much detail there is. Say what you will about Remake being a little padded out, definitely agree there, but all these extra details and all these story and character interactions, I personally love, so I'm all for it. I mean, heck, even something like Gungaga, home of Zack by the way, was an optional place to visit back in the original. In Rebirth, they expanded it to fit within the story, and honestly, it's one of the best sections of Rebirth in the entire game itself. Hamaguchi-san himself also mentioned that there'll be plenty of new characters to appear in the game. For example, Roche will be returning actually, so hey, our brother's returning. This again makes sense though, because we still have to go to places like Rocket Town, Wutai, Northern Crater, and so many more. The final thing they mentioned before moving on was that the team has their own take on what happened with Aerith at the end, and all of that will be explained in the next game. For those of you who thought that the ending was a little messy or that they fumbled that death scene with Aerith, they have stated that they are delving deeper into how Cloud reacts to losing people, especially with how much of a mess his mind currently is right now. Personally, for me, I was always of the belief that a simple remake of that original scene was never going to hit as it did back in the 90s. We all know it's there. Regardless, it has been out for almost 30 years, the original Final Fantasy VII. So simply just making a one-to-one recreation of that particular scene was never going to hit that hard. And I get what they're coming from. They're trying to delve deeper into where Cloud's mind is, and especially because it is a mess right now. And when he sees one of his friends die in front of him again, just like he had to deal with Zack, yeah, that's really going to mess you up. That's why a lot of us felt so uncomfortable with the Cloud that we saw in that CG trailer at the very end of the game, which makes a lot of sense because he's not acting like normal. That being said, however, though, I do think one thing that hurts the ending of Rebirth is simply because we need to be waiting between games 2 and 3, especially if you've played the original. We want to know all this detail now. We want to know exactly what's happening in Part 3. It's like leaving it at a cliffhanger for crying out loud. But in the end, we already knew that there was going to be a Part 3 to this game, so it's, kind of our own fault, I guess. I would imagine though, if you are new to the story, then maybe this doesn't happen, but let me know down in the comments below. Regardless, I'm expecting to see a lot of flashbacks to that time in Rebirth. And if I had to take a guess, it's probably either going to be in the Northern Crater, or part of it is going to be during the livestream scene, or it could be both. The livestream scene is mostly about Cloud and Tifa, but there could be some small parts that they maybe throw in there. It's hard to say. Other than that, there wasn't much else in regards to part 3. Again, this entire live stream was also talking about how Rebirth was made, the concept that they came up with while during the development of said game, so it was definitely really interesting to listen to, but at least we got some details for part 3. I myself am expecting to see the PC version of Rebirth be revealed at either TGS 2024, which by the way, we are going to, so if you want to see some exclusive interviews and footage that I get there on the floor, make sure you sub to the channel, or we're going to see it at the Game Awards, which I'm expecting a little bit more, but hey, TGS is here in Japan, so I would expect that as well. The reason I think it has a higher chance to be shown off at the Game Awards is because Final Fantasy VII Remake on PC was shown off there 2 years ago, so it would make sense. Not to mention that Jeff Keighley was actually over here in Japan a couple of months ago and was actually meeting up with the heads of Square, so it would make some good sense there. Also, finally, I am still expecting to see part 3 in 2027, as it's literally going to be free marketing as the 30th anniversary of Final Fantasy VII, and yes, will probably be timed exclusive to PS5, as those contracts were made way back when Remake was being made as part 1. And then probably after that, it's going to release on PC. I know Square had their earnings call in terms of going more multi-platform and everything, but if contracts are made beforehand, you can't really break those unless you go and talk to the people you made those contracts with and you both come to an agreement. I doubt Sony's really going to say, no, we want to be putting a game that we know is going to do well onto other platforms. That's just business. But now I want to ask you, what do you think? Are you excited for part 3? Even though we are still a couple of years away, I'm still thinking about it a lot, and I'm definitely playing through Rebirth near the end of the year during Christmas vacation. Let me know all your thoughts in the comments, and what is the one thing that you really hope they are able to nail when it comes to part 3? The team seems to be very confident. That is definitely one thing that I saw here during this live stream. They are really confident that this is going to be the best of the 3 games, and they cannot wait to show us more going forward. Again, let me know all your thoughts down below in the comments. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, then consider hitting that sub button. We are super close to reaching our year-end goal of 5K subs. Also, don't forget to follow us over on social media for when we go live, have new discussion videos, and even exclusive shorts and clips posted there. Link is in the pinned comments. Once again, I've been Talon with Dark Gaming. I want to thank you so much for joining me in this video and watching all the way through, and I hope you have a great day and week. Until next time, everyone, Johnny.